All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Santana. I'm the Director of Student Health and Wellness, and we are doing a presentation to honor Native American Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month. So this presentation just barely skims the surface in terms of celebrating this rich culture, but this year's theme for this month is weaving together our past, present, and future. Um, so we'll kind of go over just basic points on some topics of Native American history, and then towards the end, more focus on mental health trends with Native American people. Um, so here we go. We'll start this presentation with a land acknowledgement. I know that this is pretty common with presentations and um, meetings to kind of honor the land that we're on, and I'll kind of speak more to it in a second. But we'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Chumash and the Tongva Gabrielino tribes. And so I actually have a video here um, of the Chumash story of the Rainbow Bridge that talks about how the first people kind of arrived to California. I think it's a very beautiful story, so we're going to go ahead and listen to that before we continue.
Haku Lahumpwashwashtets. My name is Julie Tumamayat Stensley. I am an island descendant. My father, Vincent Tumamayat, the son of Cecilio Tumamayat, and the grandson of Juan de Jesus Tumamayat. Our families come from Santa Cruz Island and Santa Rosa Island, from villages such as Schwahil, Laupch, Nanuani, and Maschal on Santa Cruz, and from the village of Hechaman on Santa Rosa Island. Sahipaka, once upon a time, here on this beautiful island that we call Limu, meaning in the sea. You know it today as Santa Cruz Island. Mother Earth, Hutash, was out here. And as she had created many things here on the island, she thought something was missing. So she went to a very special plant and she gathered some magic seeds. And she threw the seeds out into the earth here on the island. And pretty soon, up from the ground, up from this beautiful earth, grew these beautiful people. She gave them many gifts here and showed them how to live happily on this island. Well, her husband, Achuoposh, the sky snake, today we know him as the Milky Way, he wanted to give the people a gift too, so he gave them the gift of fire by shooting a bolt of lightning to the ground. Well, the fires burned hot, and they kept warm with these fires, and they cooked their food. The villages started to grow and be populated with more and more children. Pretty soon, with all the noise from these children, Hutash was annoyed. And she decided that it was time for these people to move on and to move to another place. So she said to herself, I've got to think of some place to put these people, a different place, a place where they could spread out and be very happy. Well, the next morning she gathered all the people up to a very high mountain, Siwot, or as we know it today, Mount Diablo. And as she told the people to look, as they looked up into the sky across the ocean, they saw a beautiful, beautiful rainbow, Wishdoyo. And she told them that that image was a rainbow bridge. And the rainbow bridge was going to take them to a new land that was very large, and they could fill that with people. Well, as people started to climb over the bridge and cross over, many became very dizzy and very frightened because there was a mist and a fog below. They couldn't even see the ocean. Well, as they started falling off, crying out to Hutash for help, she took pity and she changed them and transformed them into dolphins. And that is what we call our brothers and sisters today of the ocean, Alakoi. Those people who crossed over on the bridge went to a place called Tismahu, where it steams out. Today we know that place is Carpinteria, and the people came off that rainbow bridge and spread out into all these beautiful places on our mainland. And that is all.
So that is the Chumash story of the Rainbow Bridge and how the Chumash tribe came to California. So just kind of a back note about land acknowledgements. So why are land acknowledgements performed or given at certain gatherings, and they were created to kind of respect and honor and acknowledge that these lands once belonged to these people that were here long before we were, right? But there is some controversy or line of thinking that land acknowledgements are just very surface level, and that more should be done to acknowledge and respect these tribes. So it may not be something that we see so common anymore, these land acknowledgements. Um, but I think kind of acknowledging the land is one step forward, but it's also onto us to kind of see what else can we do to kind of respect the people that were here before us. So just a little history about the Native American Heritage Month. So in the early 1900s, there were certain states that were advocating for a day to honor Native Americans. That day became a week in 76 and then eventually a month in 1990. And it's celebrated in November because that is the traditional harvest, end of the harvest season. It's a traditional Thanksgiving season for Native Americans. Um, and for a lot of people, it's again kind of reclaiming this holiday season, right? Um, that originally we celebrated because colonists came over and shared with the natives, but we also know there was a lot of genocide and disease and death with that, right? Um, and colonization. And so kind of reclaiming this month again to symbolize what it meant for the people that were here originally, right? That um, the Native Americans. So within the United States, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. So that doesn't count all the tribes that have existed or exist on our land. These are just the ones that are federally acknowledged and recognized, and I'll speak more to what that means later. And there are about an additional 200 other tribes that don't have federal acknowledgement or recognition. And again, this is just within the United States. So Canada also has a lot of indigenous tribes, Mexico, right? So when we think about indigenous people across the world, um, there are so many different cultures and traditions within those tribes. So what does it mean to be federally acknowledged or recognized? So there are advantages and disadvantages. Um, and basically, to be federally acknowledged, um, there are some government benefits. So when the tribe is federally acknowledged, they have sovereignty over their lands, and there's a government to government relationship. So often reservations and tribes have their own government, and they kind of have a connection with the federal government. So they're able to kind of operate on their own to a certain degree. There are some things that uh, they still wouldn't have full, and I don't know the details. Like I said, this is very overview. So there are some things that they would still probably need, um, you know, eh, I don't want to say permission for, but there's some limitations to it. So the advantages of being federally acknowledged, there are some housing programs, there are assistance programs for housing on reservation land. There is some educational funding, and then there's also healthcare. So a lot of these reservations have their own healthcare system, the Indian Health Service, um, and they could qualify for much the same public welfare benefits that, any other citizen would qualify for. But like I said, there's some disadvantages. So there's limitations on their sovereignty. And then the different disadvantages of not being federally recognized. They cannot claim their land, and thus, by not being able to claim their land, their culture preservation efforts may be difficult if they don't have the federal government to kind of assist them with this. If they're not acknowledged or recognized, they don't get additional or access to, certain government housing assistance and educational assistance. And then there's also just a lack of representation of those tribes in our government, right? So if they're federally acknowledged, um, they can have a say and input on certain things, and if they're not federally acknowledged, they don't have that same capability. So for those that want to learn more about Native American culture and the different history of the different tribes, there are plenty of museums locally that you can explore to learn about the history and the culture and the traditions of these tribes. So there's Antelope Valley, Chumash, which I think is in Thousand Oaks. Um, there was a powwow recently. Currently happening this week is a Native American filmmaker festival. Um, I think it's in the Chinese Theater on Hollywood. And so it's a festival for Native American filmmakers, and I think particularly there's youth filmmakers as well. And so you can attend and watch films. And at the very bottom there, there is a link to find a powwow near you. I know Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach has a very big and popular one that they do every year, because that university also has protected native land on the campus. So you can find a powwow near you and kind of, again, learn about the traditions and the culture and what a powwow really means, right? What's the significance of these celebrations to these tribes? So some notable figures, Native Americans in healthcare. So we have Liana Musquiz, who received an impact award. She served two tribes as as a doctor for like over 20 years. So she's big in, I think it's in the state of Montana. I think she also serves in the admissions board for the University of Washington, if I'm not mistaken, um, a part of AMA. And so she is doing good work right now in these college universities in Native American representation. So historically, we had Susie Walking Bear Yellowtail. She was one of the first Native Americans and the first Crow to graduate as an RN in the United States. And she worked to bring the Indian health system to the reservations. And then Susan La Flèche Picotte was the first female Indigenous medical doctor, graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, and she was responsible for the care of about 1,200 people on the Omaha Reservation in Nebraska. So Native Americans have been a big part of the history of medical care in this country, in terms of taking care of their own people, but also advancing healthcare in general. So we're going to focus on particularly mental health trends for this group of people. So the challenges they face, but also their strengths and resources to kind of help people. So some challenges here. So these big overarching themes are there's just inadequate mental and physical health care on these reservations. Um, So they may have access to healthcare, but it may not be adequate. They may not have access to the amount of resources or trained professionals that people outside the reservation would have access to. There's also an extinction of their culture and language, right? So um, I think this happens a lot with people who non-English speaking, right? That if as generations go on, that language starts to get lost, right? And so it can be hard to keep the language and the culture alive when this language starts to disappear. And it becomes harder to treat people if we don't have people who understand this language, right? And maybe these are people who only speak the native language and now there's not enough people who understand it, right? So that can be a threat. And then there's trends in race and gender crime and violence. Um, so you'll see a statistic here that about 80% of the perpetrators of abuse and rape of Native American women are non-Native people. So it's not a high percentage of Native on Native crime. It's non-Native people attacking Native women. And when these crimes occur, compared to white victims of the same crime, white victims get more coverage of these crimes versus Native people. And there is a rise in preventable illnesses. So there is a correlation between people who experience trauma and people who have chronic health diseases. And so if this group of people is um, at a higher risk of being traumatized versus, through a higher rate of crime, um, there is a higher risk of substance abuse disorder, right? Abusing substances. All of that can lead to an increase in these rise of preventable diseases. And then coupled that with inadequate health care, right? So people aren't being adequately treated for these diseases. Um, and so there is a high rate of poverty. About a third of all Native people live in poverty, and there's about 90,000 Native Americans who are experiencing homelessness. Um, and so there's a lack of plumbing and clean water. And so this theme of pollution, right? So if water source is polluted, you're going to get sick from that. Um, Maybe you stop drinking water and so you're drinking other things that could lead to, if you're drinking more sugary drinks, then you risk diabetes and obesity. So all these challenges are kind of interconnected. And so it's important to look at how can these people advocate for more resources? How can we as non-natives help advocate for these resources? Um, and this is where, it's important to kind of look at who we're voting for, what's on the ballot, right? A lot of times people don't vote because it's, well, it doesn't affect me, or I don't know how really to vote for this. And it's important that we educate ourselves on what the different propositions that are on ballots mean. What does that mean for our communities? And to kind of take a moment to think outside of ourselves, right? Maybe this doesn't directly affect you, but does it affect your community? Um, and whether that's positively or negatively, and to help advocate for people who may not have um, the resources or a strong enough voice to advocate for themselves. So, the opposite of these challenges, what are the strengths that Native American and Indigenous people have? So, they have strong cultural traditions. Um, and there's a lot of history and power that comes with these traditions. And so they get preserved through rituals, ceremonies, dances, storytelling, much like that first video I shared, right? The storytelling about the history of the Chumash people arriving to California. Natural medicine, right? I think as a healthcare field, um, we are obviously going to be taught Western ideals of medicine, and how do we make room for and acknowledge, you know, less traditional or native uh, types of medicine, right? And can there be a place for both, right? That one doesn't have to move out the other or take over the other, but how do you make room for both? And then language classes. So like I said, there's an extinction of this language. And so how do you keep the culture and history alive through language? And the language is so much of a strength that in the world wars, they used Native American Navajo code talkers to kind of help with the war efforts, right? Very recently, one of the last code talkers died. So it's, there's a smaller and smaller group. It's shrinking this language. And so the hope is that hopefully younger generations will take this on and keep the traditions and history alive. Another strength is their worldview. Native American and Indigenous people have a very strong understanding of the connection that they have with other people and the world at large, right? They very much understand the connection between everyone and even ancestors and people in the spirit realm, right? And so that feeds into this unity of community. Um, there's a strong importance on elders, and there's a lot of intergenerational living among Native people, right? And so there's a built-in support network when we honor and respect our elder generations, and they look after us and we look after them, right? Um, and so then these two graphics are the symbols in Indigenous art. So the sacred thunderbird is a symbol of strength and protection, and the bear in its claws is also another symbol of strength and courage. So what are some issues that are specific to Native American college students? So since 2019, about 19% of the Native population are enrolled in higher education. So this is actually one of the lower rates of enrollment and across other minority groups. It's one of the lower rates. And in addition to that, they have the lowest graduation rate. Um, so there's not that very many people, Native people being enrolled into higher education, and then those that are enrolling aren't staying enrolled. They're not completing, they're not graduating. Um, so this kind of falls into these other challenges, right? So there's financial challenges. There's a high rate of unemployment. They may be homeless, right? And so if you don't have money to pay for your education, you're not going to complete it. Um, if you're worried about where you're going to sleep at night, you're not going to be bothered to look into going to college. Um, so these things are all connected. Same thing with the digital divide, right? So there may be a lack of money in terms of I can't buy a laptop, can't afford internet, and in this day and age, you can't get by in college without these tools. And then there's just a lack of representation on campuses, right? So not very many campuses may have a center or a BIPOC center that has representation of Native American Indigenous people in terms of staff or students, right? There may not be a student group that's been formed for these issues. So um, there's kind of this invisibility around this group of students. And so it's important for us to bring awareness and to bring visibility to these students so that they can get the resources and get connected to a community on campus with other people who share the same identity. So I want to share a video with you. This is a teenager who's kind of explaining her experience in terms of finding community on campus and how her mental health is affected.
Samana, Cache, Unwanan Kima. Hi, hello, my name is Angelina Hinojosa. My tribe is Pinoleville Pomo Nation, and I was born and raised in Sacramento. I'm 17 years old. Suicide prevention is important to me because being a youth in today's generation is kind of hard, whether it's things outside of culture and community that you do without school or things at home. But with our Native youth, our percentages are so high that it makes it hard for us to understand what is suicide. Um, Even though we speak about it a lot in our communities, which is something I also want to give props for us for, there's also it still happens, and a lot of us don't know what it is. I personally deal with uh, mental health, which is another really heavy topic that a lot of people don't know. What are the signs of it? What is it exactly? Why are we feeling this way? Which is something that a lot of our youth don't understand. And so this month is important, even though we get this word out all the time, like what is suicide prevention? What does mental health look like? This month is important because we want to focus on, okay, who are our Native youth that need that support, that need that help. And this is how we all come together as a community to really prevent. And this is how we get the word out. And, whether it's campaigning, whether it's community events supported by SNAC, or even just coming together in family in general, it's important to know about. And to me, it's very important to get the word out. Also, what does that look like? Growing up, I definitely say that I almost been part of that statistic or that number of, falling off the path that I was supposed to be on. And culture is definitely what, bring me back and bring me, okay, I'm not supposed to be doing these things. It's what kept me alive, and I'd say. And even though that's something heavy to say for me, it's true. Culture is what grounds me, whether it's praying or going to ceremony on the weekends or talking to my elders. That's the way that I came back, even though sometimes they'd roughen me up or tell me, this is not okay, you're supposed to be like this. It really did help me. It really helped me being around community, it really helped me especially going to ceremonies, being in culture, because it's definitely something that gave me a purpose of being here. Being a Native youth in today's society, you don't see a lot of people that look like you, so it's easy to get lost in the wrong crowds. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so culture bring me a sense of this is where I belong. Snack was one of those places that I'd say gave me a sense of belonging because I get to meet youth that look like me and that do things just like me, whether it's ceremony or culture, and understand what that looks like. I think our started definitely was NYA, the Native Youth Ambassadors, was where I found youth that definitely I just connected with immediately. Other than NYA, I also worked with the Spark team, which is also when I grew up a little more within the community, I was able to start campaigning and doing things after learning all that knowledge from being a Native Youth Ambassador and holding all these events. I was definitely able to become a Spark member, which also we did campaigns like keeping our elders safe, Suicide Prevention Month, whether it's including LGBTQ plus or even just our Native youth in general. Along with that, like our community, I'd say we're very big, but we all know each other. And I also work with other organizations like Native Sister Circle, which gave me a place to meet young, specifically young girls like me, and have that sisterhood. Not only that, I'm also with the what is the California Native Youth Rope Project, but that was more taught me in organization, organizing skills. Like I said, these are all foundations that allowed me to grow to be the young Native lady that I am, which definitely set that tone of keeping me alive, keeping me busy, having people surround me that look like me. And other than that, events, volunteer work, everything that I can possibly do, I definitely like to be there and like to meet other youth and bring them in now that I'm getting older to give them a sense of belonging as well. I think a typical thing that they want to say is that they're not alone, but I definitely tell them that they have a belonging. Like I said, there's a small percentage in population of us from all the genocide that people created on our people, and that's just going back into history. But letting them know, like, there's people and other youth that look like you and that go to the same thing that you do, and give them a sense of, like, come with me. I can show you, like, what community is, what community looks like. Let them know that they're not alone and they have a place in this world because that's mostly what it is. And when they feel that way, they turn to things as substances that our bodies can't handle scientifically. And so definitely just taking them in and saying, you belong somewhere. And even talking to me, even though I may not look like you or we may not have the same interests, we have the same background. And culture and community is definitely what's going to connect us together.
Um, so I really liked that video. I think she really highlighted the importance of representation, right? That it was important that um, her heritage was represented in the spaces she occupied, and how important community, right? Being around other people, and how her culture and traditions helped her in terms of maintaining her mental health. Um, so I just enjoyed hearing her talk about that. And again, it just highlights the importance of finding a sense of community and connecting with your heritage and finding other people who are like you, right? We're going to feel more comfortable with people who understand us. So how do we address mental health, right? So again, there's not enough representation of Native American and Indigenous people in the field of behavioral health and mental health. It's so important that we have, um, these pioneers, the women that I showcased earlier in terms of, medical advancements, right? That we have more Native American and Indigenous representation in these fields so that they can, you know, provide research and services and techniques on how to better serve this population of people. And then just the lack of funding of healthcare, right? The healthcare in general is kind of a challenging system for anyone to navigate. And then you have the separate IHS that may be underfunded, right? So that makes it even more challenging. But there are some places where people can get some assistance and have a sense of representation in their providers, right? So the LA County Department of Mental Health is doing better about having representation of different minority groups. So whether that's Latino, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, they're trying to, you know, have more programming that focuses on these different issues for these different populations. There's also the American Indian Counseling Center, the Indigenous Circle of Wellness, and United American Indian Involvement. in behavioral health and mental health. So if you are someone who's Indigenous or Native American and you want to connect with a provider who shares that same culture and background, there are providers out there. Again, they're not as widespread as, white people, even Latinos or Black. The BIPOC community is still very underrepresented in mental health. But there are providers out there that you can connect with that share the same background. And I just want to close out with this quote. I think it again kind of highlights the theme or the strength of the Native American community in terms of connection and community with other people. So humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together, all things connect. So this is attributed to Chief Seattle of the Duwamish tribe. And so again, it's whatever I do, it's going to impact the people around me. And that everything is bound together, right? One thing is not working, it's going to trickle down and affect other things, and it's going to affect other people. So going back to my kind of call of action in terms of voting, right? That by not voting, it's that inaction is still in a way an action, right? And it's going to have a ripple effect. So the best you can do is educate yourself on the different topics and how can you again, be an ally and give a voice to people who are underrepresented. Um, and so that's all I have. These are references I have. Um, but I hope you learned something about the Native American heritage and culture. Again, like I said, this is very surface level, just barely touching on the topic. But I encourage you to go to one of those museums or check out the film festival to kind of educate yourself on the different topics. One, easy way to access is through TV show and movies. And one good show that I watched is Reservation Dogs, and it kind of talks about what the girl in the video was sharing about suicide among youth. I don't want to spoil it, but that is a theme in that show, and it's about how this group of young friends kind of deal with that um, in their reservation and among their peers. So. Um, I'm not a Indigenous or Native American person, so I can't say if it's an accurate representation, but I think it kind of helped me understand, the unique challenges. They center a lot of episodes on the IHS, the health system. So I think it's take it with a grain of salt, but that's one way you can kind of learn about this rich culture and history. So I want to thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in our future presentations.
Thank you.